Chinese motorcycles are taking over. Or at least that's what the internet would have you believe. Every time CF Moto releases a new bike with a foot-long TFT, winglets, and Brembos, the comment section immediately descends into civil war. I mean, the price tag on these new CF Motos are less than a used ZX6R sold by a guy named Kyle with 2 DUIs, so it's pretty crazy. One side thinks Chinese brands are about to destroy the Big Four entirely. The other side insists they're all disposable junk that will explode before the first oil change. But after spending time with these bikes myself and seeing firsthand how popular they're becoming, I think both sides are completely misunderstanding what's actually going on. Chinese motorcycles are probably not going to take over the industry, but they're also not going away. The truth is, they're not going to replace the Big Four. They're sort of creating an entirely new lane alongside them. It might not even be the Big Four anymore. What if we're staring down the barrel of the Big Five? Let's talk about it. Chinese brands like CF Moto are exploding in popularity because they're perfectly suited for the gap that exists in the motorcycling industry. For the last decade or so, Japanese companies have become pretty conservative. I mean, I get that. It's big business. Motorcycling is not currently a massively expanding industry full of young maniacs who are either financially endowed or equally prone to risky behavior. You don't have an endless supply of dudes in their 20s who are going to the dealership every other year to climb the sport bike power progression ladder. There are some, sure, but nowhere near as many as there have been in the past. Most riders today either buy one beginner bike and quit 3 years later, or they're older dudes with money buying flagship ADVs or limited edition Elvis Presley Bonnevilles or something like that. So manufacturers have adapted accordingly. That's why so many manufacturers are not taking big risks anymore. You get all the cross-platform 2-cylinder engines. Yamaha's doing it, as is Suzuki, Honda, hell, even Ducati. We're seeing less experimentation, less risk, and in many ways, less excitement. Meanwhile, new young riders have a completely different value system. They don't care that your uncle's VFR is still running with 100,000 miles on the clock. Some of these prospective CF Moto buyers were born after the K5 Gixxer was released. I mean, can you even wrap your head around that? As a result, these young buyers care about completely different things. Heritage be damned. They want flashy style, interesting engine sounds, and fancy tech. They care more that a bike looks cool on a vertical TikTok video filmed at a gas station at 11 p.m. rather than if it has 50 years of brand legacy. And Chinese companies understand this perfectly. If you're a brand new rider walking into a dealership today, the emotional decision becomes obvious. On one side of the showroom, there is a Suzuki with a calculator dash and a Ninja 650 with right side up forks. Or there is a CF Moto with brake ducts, a 3-cylinder engine, and 1% APR financing. Whether the old heads want to believe it or not, that formula appears to be incredibly effective. And one of the reasons we don't need to see Chinese brands as an immediate threat to the greater motorcycle industry is because I don't think CF Moto are really going to steal the Big Four's customers away. Even if in another 5 years, after all reliability or dealership concerns are quelled, there are simply people who will always buy a Honda, Yamaha, or Kawasaki instead, even if the bike from CF Moto is more powerful, more interesting, and more affordable. Think of how many people still buy Harley Davidsons despite the common knowledge that they are heavier, slower, and egregiously more expensive than almost any other bike on the market. People are attracted to the brand, the culture, and the distinct characteristics of the machine. While the difference between a CF Moto and a Japanese bike are nowhere near as drastic, I think the principle still applies. Beyond the girth of the spec sheet or the juiciness of the value prop, a Chinese bike just won't fit the bill if you've got your heart set on something else. If anything, I think CF Moto is creating new customers. People who are entering the sport from a whole new angle. Because typically if you wanted to start riding, you'd buy a used Japanese bike for a couple grand, learn how to fix it from 240p YouTube tutorials or arcane forum posts. Then as you got more experience and earned more money, you'd move on to a bigger and better bike. But the state of the used motorcycle market is kind of sad in a lot of parts of the US. It's almost as if in certain areas the market never really returned to normal following the COVID era used bike boom. You got guys selling 12-year-old super sports for $9 grand because they're future classics, bro. So for a young rider today who grew up playing Minecraft instead of building skateboard ramps, a brand new Chinese bike with a warranty, financing, and modern tech probably looks a lot more attractive than a borderline ancient Japanese bike that could quickly become a project. Older riders look at motorcycles through the lens of long-term ownership, brand legacy, and reliability. Younger riders seem to view motorcycles more like consumer tech. They want something exciting right now that looks cool and feels premium and gets them riding with minimal friction. And CF Moto is speaking their language. It might as well become the new gateway drug, meaning that it will be a new niche that serves to exist a different customer, not that the big four are just going to disappear. And if you take a step back, you realize that none of this is even new. Japanese manufacturers were once viewed in a similar way that we see Chinese-made bikes today. It's easy to forget, not just because myself and many of you watching were not even alive back in those days, but because companies like Yamaha and Honda feel so permanent now. You couldn't imagine the realm of motorcycling existing without them. But there was a time where British and American motorcycles were the standard, and Japanese bikes were seen as little rinky-dink commuter appliances, or worse, derivative copies of established brands. Gee, that sounds kind of familiar, right? They didn't have the heritage or the character of the earliest manufacturers. They weren't seen as real bikes. Then over time, the big four perfected the craft. They set new benchmarks for reliability, manufacturing scale, performance, and eventually global domination. They became so powerful that it reshaped the entire industry to look like what it does today. But at the same time, their growth didn't outright delete the other companies from existence. I mean, they certainly played a hand in Triumph's hardship, for example, but that's besides the point. I mean, they almost did delete Triumph. I mean, how many British brands did they delete? A lot. But people still bought Harleys. The Euro brands were still plugging away with their 30-hour work weeks and government-mandated cigarette and wine breaks. Because motorcycles are not always rational purchases, and the objective best bike for the price isn't always the bike you end up purchasing. If motorcycling was based on logic, we'd all be riding around on NC 750s wearing Aero-stitch suits and discussing fuel economy online. Thankfully, that is not the world we live in. Motorcycling has always been reliant on personal taste and emotional appeal as much as specs and value. So maybe that will be the story for Chinese brands. They won't dominate or take over just because they provide better value, but perhaps they'll become a new permanent flavor in the motorcycle industry. If there are always customers purchasing a KTM instead of a Honda, despite evidence to suggest that the latter is a more intelligent purchase, then certainly there will be people who buy a Honda instead of a CF Moto. Now, we're already seeing the motorcycle market split into two tiers of customer. You've got affordable bikes and premium bikes. And maybe in the future, the big four will just kind of move fully into the premium category. I mean, have you seen the prices of some of these beginner bikes today? It's nuts. A Ninja 500 SE KRT edition, or just a regular old CBR 500R, both retail for $6,500. That pushes them to over $8,000 out the door realistically. Maybe they end up inching further and further to cater to a more premium buyer. And if that continues, I think we may eventually see a dynamic similar to other industries, where legacy Japanese brands become viewed as more established, trustworthy, premium options, while brands like CF Moto or even Royal Enfield dominate the more value end of the market with aggressive pricing and features. I mean, it wouldn't be unlike how Kia and Hyundai carved out their space in the car world. They managed to provide value and features at prices well below Toyota or Honda, and while Korean cars have had their fair share of issues over the last few decades, they're now respectable brands with their own niche and target customers. CF Moto with others like QJ Motors or ZX Moto likely will follow suit and maybe have a similar story in another 5 to 10 years. My generation of riders discuss Turbo Hayabusas with mythical reverence. Old-timers tell harrowing tales of surviving the two-stroke H2 Widowmakers. And in the future, a gray-haired Braden will tell his grandkids about all the aura he farmed while dancing in gray sweatpants in front of his CF Moto on TikTok. That may sound ridiculous, but stranger things have happened. At the very least, I can tell things are changing. The Chinese brands are positioning themselves to become a permanent part of the future of motorcycling and not just some temporary fad. Does that mean that the big four are doomed? Definitely not. But it might change how they're viewed in juxtaposition to the Chinese companies. But there is a wild card in all of this that could completely change the trajectory of Chinese motorcycles, at least here in the United States, where I live. And it has very little to do with the motorcycles themselves or the people who will ride them. If you've been paying attention to the auto industry lately, you've probably noticed that Chinese EVs are becoming absurdly dominant around the globe. Companies are producing electric cars with crazy tech, good quality, and aggressive pricing at a scale that's making Western companies sweat. But despite that, most of these cars never end up making it to the US in any meaningful capacity, because tariffs, regulations, political concerns, and protectionism keeps them at bay. Alternatively, Chinese motorcycles have seemingly flown under the radar because they serve a smaller, more enthusiast-minded market. Compared to Reagan saving Harley-Davidson in the 80s when the Big Four rising to power, no one in Washington seems particularly concerned about a couple thousand broccoli heads financing a 450 SS for 7 years. I guess they're all too busy insider trading over in Congress. But what happens if these brands keep growing aggressively? Right now, Chinese motorcycles might seem mostly like a topic of debate for enthusiasts online, but if CF Moto, QJ, Benelli, or Moto Morini continue expanding dealer networks, improving quality, and selling more and more bikes here, somebody in charge might start asking some larger economic questions. Politics, economics, and trade policy all influence what products succeed in certain countries. The modern motorcycle is not just judged by performance or engineering, it's judged by public perception too. Look, at the end of the day, I think the internet wants this conversation to be way simpler than it actually is. People want a clear winner and loser. They want ones and zeros, black and white. They want Chinese bikes to pose a real threat to legacy brands, or they just want to be brushed off as worthless junk. But in reality, it's way more nuanced than that. Because motorcycles are not smartphones. They're not refrigerators. Not everyone is buying a bike for the same reason. The best value option doesn't automatically erase everything else from existence. We have decades of proof that indicates otherwise. I think what we're seeing is the emergence of a new permanent lane in motorcycling. Chinese brands target younger, newer, and more value-driven riders in a way that many legacy manufacturers refuse to, simply can't, or are very late to the game in doing so. And whether you like it or not, it's clearly working. An entire generation of people may enter motorcycling through brands like CF Moto. They won't be starting on an SV650 from Marketplace like they used to, but instead, they're going to start on a fully financed Chinese bike with Bluetooth connectivity and enough ambient lighting to look like a gaming laptop. I feel like I'm seeing it firsthand, not via social media, but just out here in my local area in Austin, a city that serves as a pretty accurate microcosm of American motorcycle culture. And honestly, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. More riders entering the hobby is ultimately good for all of us. And listen, I cannot go back to working an office job. A thriving motorcycle industry is pretty crucial to my livelihood at this point. I have no real marketable skills. I'm a YouTuber, for God's sake. Chinese motorcycles means more people riding, a new approach to the segment, more competition, and hopefully some new and exciting bikes. Does that mean the Big Four are doomed? No way. Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki are dominant in the industry for a reason. Well, Suzuki might be doomed, but that's a story for another day. Regardless, the industry's changing, and so are the customers. Maybe the future of motorcycling won't just belong to the Big Four brands anymore. Maybe we're staring down the barrel of the Big Five. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of today's episode. What do you guys think about Chinese motorcycles? Just kidding. I know you already told me 5 seconds after starting the video and not listening to anything I had to say. At the very least, I think we can all agree that things are going to look pretty interesting in the next couple of years. And honestly, being here on the ground floor, they've changed a lot. And hey, at the very least, they're not electric vehicles. So that's pretty cool. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Fact: the quietest place on Earth is Microsoft's anechoic chamber in Redmond, Washington at minus 20.6 decibels. Goodbye.